Welcome to the Professional Development Speaker Series sponsored by the National Dissemination Center for Career and Technical Education and co-sponsored by the Ohio Department of Education Office of Career, Technical, and Adult Education and the Ohio State University chapter of Omicron Tau Theta. My name is Julie Noble, and I work for the Ohio Department of Education. I want to welcome you to today's speaker series. Before we introduce today's guest speakers, a word about the process we will follow for the presentation. Our guest will present for approximately 45 minutes, followed by a 30-minute question and answer period. Questions will be asked by the audience here at the Longaberger Alumni House and by those who are logged onto the NCCPE chat rooms. Today, the National Dissemination Center is honored to have Ivan Charner and Robin White from the Academy for Educational Development's National Institute for Work and Learning. They're located in Washington, D.C., and their presentation is entitled Curriculum Integration: Does It Matter Who's in the Driver's Seat? Our speakers today have a combined 50 years of experience in education and education reform, and Robin says that only 5 of those years belong to her and that she started when she was 12. So with that, we look forward to hearing their exciting topic.
Thank you, Julie. Before I start, I need to warn everybody that Robin and I have been working together a long time. Not together for 50 years, but for a long time. And we have been known to complete each other's sentences. So we'll probably do this as part of the fireside chat today. What we're going to be talking about today are the preliminary findings from a study of 4 integrated curriculum models that we've been looking at for the past year or so. The 4 models that we're looking at are differentiated by the driver or the catalyst. We have one model that's employer-led, one that is teacher-led, one that was led by university faculty, and one that's a mixed or a multiple model. The study that we did emerged from 2 different directions. The first was from the growing focus on curriculum integration of a number of educational reform efforts, particularly Perkins, Career and Technical Education, and School to Work. Both of those reforms have curriculum integration at the heart of them. The second area that kind of led us in this direction was some work we've been doing in the state of Michigan on a very sophisticated employer and union-driven curriculum integration model. And we said we really needed to take a closer look at this and to see if other models were having similar impact on that. What we suspected was that there were programmatic differences emerging in curriculum integration efforts led by different catalysts. That's what we went in with. Our goal was to add to the research on curriculum integration with some in-depth information on the merits and strengths of the 4 models, also where there were barriers and challenges around the models. Our focus today, as Julie said, is to explore the question, does it matter who's in the driver's seat? Does it matter if it's an employer leading or a school leading or a university leading? Before getting into it, I just want to say that this has been the kind of research where we're really doing exploratory work. And with this type of research, it's really been a dynamic process for us, where we go out and we look at the findings, and we've been changing our thinking, revising our hypotheses, reanalyzing data, and thinking about what it means again. And in fact, this morning when Robin and I were talking about the presentation, we added another piece of context that we hadn't thought of before. So it's really a dynamic process that we've been going through, and I think the outcomes have been much more rewarding because of it. Just briefly, what we'll do today, I'm going to discuss a couple of things: the original hypothesis that we went in with, the original definition of curriculum integration that we started with, and the methodology of the work. Robin's then going to report on some of the key findings from the study, and then we're going to use some of the questions that are on the web that we provided for further discussion. And we'll end finally with an open question and answer from the audience, both here in the building and also on the webcast. So if you look at the first figure that's up, it's our original hypothesis, and it's a pretty simple hypothesis. Basically, we went in thinking that the initial catalyst or driver, those 4 different drivers, would impact curriculum integration, which would then impact outcomes. As an example, we thought that, for instance, if an employer was leading, if they were the catalyst, that employer-led curriculum integration reforms would be treated differently than teacher-led ones, with the sense that if it was employer-led, teachers might say, oh, this is really going to be focused on job preparation of students, and or work-focused, so teachers might view it differently. Or if it was university-led, the assumption might be, oh, automatically this has to be post-secondary focused, which most people think is a good, so everybody's going to go on to college. In fact, we didn't find that in most cases, but that's our original hypothesis that we used going in. We tried to, in thinking at the outset about a definition, it was really a challenge for us. We went through the literature, and most of the literature on curriculum integration describes models without defining what is meant. We went back to the legislation, and the legislation is pretty oblique when it comes to defining what curriculum integration is. Perkins defines it as an incorporation of academic and vocational education programs that achieve academic and vocational competencies that are measured at the completion of the program. Doesn't really tell me what integrated curriculum is. The National School to Work Office defined it as integrated curriculum is when academic and occupational career subject matter normally offered in separate courses are taught in a manner that emphasizes relationships among the disciplines. Again, nice words, but not very specific. So we took that and we said, okay, we needed to have a definition going in. You'll see our first definition is not a whole lot better than the two I just read to you. Going in, we said curriculum integration is a relationship between academic and occupational or career subject matter that goes beyond what would normally occur in the delivery of either the academic or the occupational subject matter alone. Again, not very specific, but in that definition, we were clear for ourselves that we didn't consider traditional vocational education that by necessity needs to incorporate some academic learning to be curriculum integration. Equally, we didn't consider academic courses or programs that offer career exploration or career development to be curriculum integration. The critical component in that first definition was that the relationship must go beyond what would normally occur in the delivery of instruction. And we're going to return a little later to the definition because we have built on that definition and really used the research that we found to come up with what we think is a much better, much more specific definition. At the outset, we undertook a review of some of the recent literature. We did this to identify potential curriculum integration sites, to guide protocol development. And in doing that, it's important for me to note that there was very little in the literature, almost nothing, on the drivers or catalysts. You don't see that in the literature. It's not talked about. But we did use the literature, we used it, and we developed a short list of possible sites. We also talked to other researchers and others in the field for each of the different catalysts or drivers. The final decision on the 4 sites, we tried to have a balanced mix between urban, rural, and suburban sites, and also different geographic regions. We ended up with 4 sites: Michael E. DeBakey High School for the Health Professions in Houston, Texas, as the university faculty-driven site; East San Gabriel Valley Regional Occupational Program Technical Center in California as the mixed model; Johnson County High School Agriculture Program in Mountain City, Tennessee as the high school teachers catalyst model; and the Lansing Area Manufacturing Partnership in Lansing, Michigan as the employer-led model. Briefly on the methodology, we really used a very traditional case study approach. We did a combination of material review and analysis, of observation, and our primary mode of data collection was interviewing. We developed protocols for the catalysts or the drivers, the administrators of the school if they weren't the catalyst, school staff, employers, post-secondary education people, community-based organizations where appropriate. We talked to parents and we talked to students. In all, we interviewed over 50 people in the sites. We've got a lot of information, a lot of data on what it is. And we organized the questions around a number of major topics: the goals of the initiative, the context or the history of the initiative. Some of them are fairly new, others have been around for a number of years. The design, the outcomes, and finally the lessons learned. I'm going to turn to Robin. She's going to talk about some of the findings, and then I'll come back and talk about from the questions, and we'll springboard hopefully into some nice dialogue with the audience both here and on the webcast.
Thanks, Ivan. I realize that the findings are probably of the most interest to the folks both here in the audience and those who are joining us via the web, but I think we need to go back a little bit and tell you about what we found at each of the sites, because that's the basis, obviously, for our cross-site findings. I'm going to just present them in the order that Ivan presented them. As he mentioned, Michael E. DeBakey High School for the Health Professions in Houston, Texas was the site ultimately selected as a university-driven model. That is a theme-based academy, a highly selective academic magnet. It accepts only about a quarter of its applicants each year. As of the 2000-2001 school year, they had about 655 students, almost 90% of whom were minority. This school has evolved and shifted its focus considerably since it first opened in the early 70s. The original focus was on preparing minority students for careers in allied health. By the late 80s, the emphasis was much more on preparation for more advanced careers as physicians or researchers rather than LPNs or technicians. More than 99% of the school's graduates now go on to college. Approximately 60% of them ultimately do pursue careers related to the advanced medical careers. At DeBakey, the healthcare arena is the context for all instruction. You don't have an isolated class in which someone presents health terminology in English or some introduction of science material into a health occupations introductory course. It is across everything that goes on within the school. You have academic material integrated into career courses and vice versa, career material integrated into academic courses. One of the very unique features of DeBakey, and clearly something that's going to be very difficult to replicate, is the stature and clout of Michael E. DeBakey's personal involvement. I don't know how you go out and clone Dr. DeBakey. It also has the advantage of the support of the Baylor College of Medicine. The Dean of Instruction is at the school, is a Baylor Med School faculty member. Even though she's paid now by the Houston School District, she's on site at the school. You also have a unique location that adds to the power of the program and serves as another resource. They are on the Texas Medical Center campus. This helps for work-based learning. This helps for providing experts. There are so many things that can be drawn upon simply on the basis of that location. Another thing we found there is that they were taking integration into courses that we don't even think about as sources for curriculum integration. For example, you have a French teacher who's emphasizing The Plague by Camus because of its obvious connections to health. Every course is expected to find these connections, identify them, and build on them. Professional development is emphasized throughout the school. If you're a new teacher, you're expected not only to go through an orientation, you're assigned a mentor who's going to work with you throughout your first year. Professional development days are organized around both vertical and horizontal teams. One time you might have the English department, 9-12, getting together to figure out what they can do differently or better to address the healthcare theme. Another day it might be all of the 9th grade instructors looking at that same issue. And in the summer, all of the teachers come together for a week-long workshop. It just isn't a one-shot, here's what we mean by curriculum integration, let's go do it. It's a consistent and constant support for it. At East San Gabriel Valley, that is, for those of you who weren't familiar, eastern Los Angeles County, but not the actual city of LA. We considered that our mixed model going in because we had, through document review, evidence of considerable university and employer involvement. What we ultimately came away with when we left was a recognition that employers and university folks and faculty there at the school were contributing, but the driver was really the superintendent. She's an incredible dynamo, and she can get anybody to do anything, and has no hesitancy whatsoever to do so. The ROP there is actually a partnership of 7 school districts, 4 community colleges, and 3 state universities. It's one of 74 ROPs in the state of California. Being from the East Coast, I didn't even know what an ROP was until I got into this study. And I can tell you briefly, they were created by the state in '67 as a vehicle for consolidating federal and state dollars to provide regional employment training activities for both high school students and adult learners. East San Gabriel is somewhat unique in that it is also recognized as a post-secondary institution by the U.S. Department of Education. It has a full range of vocational offerings that are provided generally at 2 main campuses, although they do have some courses offered at partner schools and satellite locations. They generally enroll 7,000 to 8,000 students per year, mostly juniors and seniors, freshmen and sophomores on a space available and contingent basis on circumstances. They do have programs for high-risk students who are coming in at a much younger age even. Typical student spends about a half day at the home school and 2 to 4 hours on activities provided by the ROP. I say activities provided because it may be a combination of coursework and work-based learning. They place a very high emphasis on work-based learning. The integration efforts at the ROP date back to the early 80s. Here again, a lot of these sites, as Ivan was mentioning, have a great history behind them. They didn't just wake up one morning and decide to do this, and some of what has happened is indeed based on what they learned as they've gone through the process. The initial effort at East San Gabriel was based on trying to incorporate academic lessons into the vocational classes. As I said earlier, the typical student attends academic classes at a home school, then comes over to the ROP for vocational instruction. Once they started this incorporation, they began to get a series of federal and state grants to advance their concept of integration. And that pretty much came to its broad fruition in the they held the Summer Institute for Integration of Academic and Vocational Learning. They paired off teams of academic and vocational teachers to develop lesson plans. Second institute was held the following summer, and the products of these institutes were subsequently compiled into they called it 3-volume. It's really a 3-notebook series of activities that they've disseminated widely to teachers, initially in notebook form and now on the web. More recently, they've moved into something called design-based learning, which is rooted in a graduate program taught by Doreen Nelson at Cal State Pomona, which is right down the street. This basically is an instructional strategy that uses the principles of design as a basis for instruction. Design-based learning combines interdisciplinary lessons, project-based learning, teamwork, and problem-solving. In most instances, the students are building models of never-before-seen workplaces. That ranges from everything from cosmetology to allied health to automotive shop. I saw more models, I think, in 2 days than I have ever seen. The student performance is evaluated against criteria that they've developed jointly with the teachers. The teachers have their designated list of needs. I have to see that you've evidence that you've learned this, that you're going to present for 5 minutes, that you've worked with your teammates, and a student designated list of don't wants. Don't want to have to write a paper. Well, sometimes they have to, but at least that's the concept. Right now, they've had 1/3 of the faculty trained in design-based learning and are trying to go deeper. And their latest focus is on identifying ways in which each of the vocational classes that they provide can complement or contribute to student performance on the state standards. Johnson County Vocational School Agricultural Program is about as far away as you can get from LA. This is rural eastern Tennessee. Very small, very homogeneous, about 800 kids. This was our faculty-driven model. Everything really was driven by 2 ag teachers, 1 part-time, 1 full-time when this started. It's set within a comprehensive high school, although exactly how comprehensive a school with 800 students total is can obviously be debated. The emphasis on the agriculture department reflects the local economy, what people do, as well as the subject matter expertise of the teachers that got the whole thing started. Because the Voc department took the lead in this, you still see that in the integration activities. For the most part, you're looking at academic material being integrated into vocational classes as opposed to the other direction, although that's beginning to change. I think it'd be interesting to go back in a few years and see how much it has changed. The earliest efforts were in the form of quite rudimentary hydroponic and aquaculture activities. Students that observed these on a visit to Epcot Center in Florida came back energized. The teachers tried to get something going. When the state legislators came in and looked at this, they were like, wow. And their efforts triggered not only a series of federal grants and state grants, but also private matching funds. So you now have an immense state-of-the-art greenhouse, a very large aquaculture facility, and this is out in, to put it nicely, almost the middle of nowhere. You can't really get there. You fly into the Tri-Cities airport and drive. About 150 students out of the 800 in the high school are now enrolled in ag classes, so it has attracted a larger pool of students. It's also now attracting, at least based on students' self-reported data, a larger group of students who are interested in using the ag classes as a mechanism for enhancing their understanding of advanced math and science concepts. And the actual greenhouse and aquaculture facility where you've got kids raising tilapia and hydroponic lettuce and a few other things attract other teachers. The academic teachers come in there just to see it. They see the kids getting engrossed. And let's try to work on this. The basic instructional strategy there is team teaching. The Lansing Area Manufacturing Project that Ivan mentioned, that we had been involved with the evaluation activities for a number of years, is, as the name suggests, operated out of the Lansing, Michigan area. It is driven by the UAW-GM Center for Human Resources and operated in conjunction with the Ingham Intermediate School District. I know from work I did with Kellogg Foundation, Michigan is one of those places that has intermediate school districts that cover several local school districts. It's a governance structure. It's not an actual delivery structure except for things like sometimes special ed classes and other special programs. LAMP is a pull-out program. It's housed within the training center at a UAW-GM facility. That gives the folks immediate access to the work site and the expertise of those who are in the work site. It serves about 50 students a year, mainly seniors. They attend LAMP for 2.5 hours every day, so it is a very intensive time commitment. The diverse participant pool is drawn from about 25 high schools and 3 school districts. It has a very sophisticated project-based curriculum that integrates state academic standards, employability skills, and a vocational focus on all aspects of automotive manufacturing. It incorporates both classroom and work-based learning, and it's taught by a team of 3 teachers who have both academic and vocational experience and expertise. Both the teachers and the students work as in teams throughout the year. The CHR actually paid for the development of this curriculum. They initially tried to beg, borrow, and adapt, and when that didn't work out as planned, they had staff from the intermediate school district working with subject matter experts from the plant to create a curriculum that basically now consists of 6 major units of study, everything from human resources and business principles to manufacturing processes and design. Student participation culminates in what they refer to as a capstone experience. Teams of students research an authentic workplace problem and then present their findings to an audience of parents, business people, and educators. We are now involved in a longitudinal study of the LAMP results, and that's really just getting underway, but some of the early findings suggest that the young people who have participated in this project attend college at a higher rate than their peers and earn higher wages than their peers. That's pretty much the summation of where we went. We have much more extensive information about it in the paper. But we came back and, as Ivan said, volumes of paper. We talked to more than 50 people. when we asked folks to send us a little bit of information about their project, we frequently got that largest FedEx box. And as we tried to review the notes and tried to boil down what we had and capture the essence of each site we visited, some of the descriptors that we thought about in terms of driver weren't the things that came to the surface. As we looked at DeBakey, we realized what it really is a single industry-focused comprehensive high school. In contrast, the ROP has a multiple vocational focus, and it's a pull-out program with kids drawn from a number of districts. In moving over to Johnson County or Mountain City, Tennessee, you had again a single vocational focus, but it's within a comprehensive high school. And LAMP was a single industry pull-out with participation from multiple districts. These summaries sort of, for us, crystallized the notion of the context in which curriculum integration took place. And it led us to the recognition that context was a critical, if not the critical, determinant of the success or efficacy of a curriculum integration effort. The kinds of things we'd expected to find based on the driver weren't there. We didn't find evidence that work-based learning was all that much better, for example, in LAMP than at DeBakey. Yes, LAMP had significant employer involvement, whereas DeBakey was driven by a university, or in this case, medical school faculty, but we weren't finding the kind of breakdowns we expected by driver. And as we went further, we realized that in some instances, the catalyst is able to shape or create the context, as the UAW GM Center for Human Resources did with LAMP. Other times they're not, but the context seemed to be what was really shaping the program. And this moved us then to our revised hypothesis. As you see here, we thought that it was the catalyst or the driver. We now have the catalyst or driver either creating or running into the context. By running into, I give an example such as the Regional Occupational Program in East San Gabriel. It is by law a provider of multiple vocational tracks, but it is not an academic instruction center. You don't have an English teacher there. You don't have a math teacher or a physics or a French teacher. So it's a lot more difficult to integrate those subjects into the curriculum. If you take the context, we divided it into two factors: curriculum/content and instruction/delivery. To some extent, those elements are interrelated, as you see here by the arrow going across. In some ways, those are also driven by the context. If you have a catalyst, there again, going back to DeBakey, someone who has immense personal clout, that can shape both the curriculum content and the instruction and delivery. It can also reshape it when he decided that, no, a focus on allied health is really setting the bar way too low. We need to go much higher. And in some ways, the instruction and delivery and the curriculum and content are indeed determined by what we refer to as the malleability of the context. In some cases, you can massage it around to get where you need to. I'd say Johnson County was a pretty good example of that. You're working within a high school, a comprehensive high school, but scheduling could be adjusted, teachers could be brought on board. It started very small, but now you have more and more academic teachers who are willing to say, okay, yeah, I'll go team teach with these guys in the ag department, and I can adjust my curriculum to work with them. And frequently what you're seeing there now is they get together, they plan a lesson or series of lessons, and then they take turns delivering them. I think there again, if you go back later, you're going to see more and more of that in greater depth. So that really is where we are now going to go back out and see, does this hypothesis hold? But, you know, we said context is important, and a couple of people have looked at us and said, okay, well, what do you mean by context? Is it everything and anything? To some extent, yes, but We identified it as we went through our summary in terms of 3 features, and Ivan and I, as he was saying this morning, think we may have now hit on the 4th. And as we rewrite it, we may add 5 and 6. But that the focus is certainly a critical one. Whether it's a single industry or a theme or even a career pathway versus multiple vocational programs. It just, as I have sort of alluded, is a lot more difficult to integrate curriculum when there are multiple occupational areas being taught. If I'm an English teacher working with someone around the automotive industry or the health industry, I can use vocabulary, I can use literature, I can do a lot of things based on one of those. But if I'm trying to coordinate my English instruction with 15, 20, or 30 occupational areas, what vocabulary am I going to use? What literature am I going to use? How am I going to find the time to simply sit down and understand the instructional sequence that all those vocational teachers are trying to deliver? It just gets exponentially harder. The more career pathways you're linked to or vocational classes, the harder it is, the integration. One of the things that we really realized as we got there was a review of our conversations from the ROP. We had teachers there who were vocational teachers talking with us about their integration efforts and realized that was a big piece of it, that they were isolated, they were on one campus, and there was no way every English teacher in the county was going to be contacting them and trying to coordinate with them. Their only real recourse was to try to do it themselves, and I think that's what they're trying to do. That moves us into the whole notion of location, whether it's in-house versus pull-out. It's just a lot easier if you're on the same campus or even in the same facility. If you've got to go across town or across district lines to coordinate or collaborate, it's going to be harder. We think that in some ways this is getting even harder now because of the growing emphasis on the standards. If you've got an academic teacher who says, I'm being held to, I have to cover all of these materials in this amount of time, and now you expect me to go out and meet with vocational teachers over there and worksite coordinators over here? You got to be kidding me. What's the value? It's distracting me from my primary purpose. And it really also, though, has to do with the isolation issue that I was mentioning again, too. That if you take folks out and just say, okay, voc is over here, academic is over here, you've also made a statement. It's more than where they're delivered. You're saying they're separate entities. LAMP was unique in this respect because it was a pull-out program. It did have kids taken off their campuses for a separate kind of instruction. What made that unique, though, was that you had both vocational and academic teachers delivering the curriculum. Where LAMP ended up with the problem of location was when you attempted to tie what they learned at the training center back to what they were also learning at their home high schools. That communication has not worked very well to date. There again, you're looking at 25 high schools, and how are 3 teachers going to do that? And then the other was the number of sites. This is not the rocket science part of this, but the complexity increases with the number of sites. If it's hard to transfer collaboration across one building to another, it's exponentially harder if it's 1 to 20 or 1 to 30. And basically, that's where we are right now, as I said, based on what we thought were the characteristics. The other one we realized this morning, and this isn't going to be surprising to any of you in education, is all 4 of these sites had some type of extra resources. I'm not saying it's all about money, but they all had some type of extra resources. They weren't trying to do it within the constraints of what they had. They may have started that way, but they had either subsequent infusions of capital and or grant funds and or personal investments of leadership, such as DeBakey. If you look at DeBakey, they had DeBakey's investment, Baylor Medical Center, Baylor College of Medicine, Texas Medical Center. If you look at LAMP, you had UAW and GM, in addition to quite a few contributions from the intermediate school district. If you look at Johnson County, you had legislators that got actively involved and got them not only government funding, but private matching funds. And East San Gabriel is an amazing grant machine. They have a fabulous capacity to develop good ideas and market them effectively. And they have done that not only in the public arena, but in the private arena. So that is, I think, going to be our fourth characteristic of context. And I was just going to wrap here before we turn to the questions with a little bit of a notion of one of the places we want to go in our next round of visits. If you look at these three, and this isn't really relevant to the extra resources, all of these taken together begin to suggest, at least to us, that a smaller learning community may be the most conducive environment or context for curriculum integration. And one of the things we hope to do when we go back out in the field is test that notion as well.
Thanks, Robin. What we're going to do for a little while is focus on some of the questions that we raised and are on the net. We've picked 4 of them. One we'll spend a little more time on because it's going to give us an opportunity to talk about the new definition, or the definition that we've come up with that has emerged from our work. And then we'll talk about 3 more and then open it up for a general discussion, both from the audience here and those that are on the webcast. I apologize for reading the questions, but I realize everybody doesn't have them. So the first question is, what is meant by curriculum integration, which is allowing us to take a look at revised definition of curriculum integration. Let me read it, and then what I want to try to do is take some of the preliminary findings that led us to rethink and work on this definition. Curriculum integration is a series of conscious and informed strategies used to connect academic and vocational content so that one becomes a platform for instruction in the other over an extended period of time. And there's a second part of the definition I'll read and then put up later because the technology is more advanced than I am. I don't quite know how to go backward and forward on this very well. Basically what it says is curriculum integration is a double helix with academic content and instruction regularly intersecting vocational content and instruction and vice versa. So if you think of a double helix really intertwining itself, that's what that definition leads to for us. Let me take each of the different pieces of the definition and talk about what we saw in some of the sites. And I'm just going to give you illustrative examples. The first piece of the definition that we think is important is the notion of conscious and informed strategies. These are intentional and in-depth efforts to include information beyond what's required for basic mastery of academic and vocational content. So the notion is you really have to go deep, and it has to be intentional. The blending of academic and vocational content and instruction is deliberate, and it's planned. In Johnson County, as Robin talked about, they use mini lessons in math, social studies, science, and English as part of the everyday classroom activities in the agriculture courses in the school. So they are really embedding them, and they're very conscious and informed in that sense. The second piece of the definition is connecting academic and vocational content. Strategies that connect academic and vocational content result in content that is primarily academic with vocational elements woven in throughout the academic course, or the reverse, primarily vocational with academic elements woven throughout. So at the Bakey High School, which is a heavily academic high school, what you have are the academic courses with vocational elements woven throughout the academic curriculum. In Johnson City and Lamp, it's more of a vocational content with the academic woven in. Some specific examples is that to help the students attain their post-secondary and career goals, DeBakey really provides them with both a basic and a vigorous instruction in health sciences and health occupations. always linked to their academic courses. So every student at DeBakey goes through a preceptorship. They spend time at the Texas Medical Center, and that information is integrated back into all of their, or most of their, academic courses. The example that Robin gave about Camus in the French course, it's more than just Camus and reading the plague. They relate that to other kinds of health science activities that are going on around the world. So they were using that and comparing it to the Ebola virus that was taking place in Africa. So they've used the French content and the reading of Camus and related it to their other courses. LAMP, on the other hand, uses the vocational content to talk about and to teach academic standards. So they're integrating it in the reverse way. The third element is that the notion of serving as a platform for instruction, where strategies for delivering academic and vocational content are there so that one becomes a platform of instruction over the other. And it occurs when instructors are using examples from vocational coursework to teach academic concepts, so that students see the uses and applications outside of the vocational context in which the information and theories were originally presented. So you've got the academic teachers presenting vocational things or working with vocational coursework outside of where it normally would appear. At the same time, instructors also use examples from academic coursework so that students see real-world applications outside of the academic or theoretical context in which they're originally presented. Again, LAMP here and Johnson County classes are great examples. Their classes are taught by teams of vocational and academic teachers. As each team presents the material, they layer in perspectives from their areas of subject matter expertise. So that layering is a very important aspect of it. In Johnson County, social studies teachers might talk about federal regulations and regulatory processes, and then the agricultural teacher would use specific examples of how regulations impact the greenhouse operations to make the lessons real for the students. So they're taking more of the abstract and making it real. It's interesting to note that in all four sites, they've all incorporated work-based and work-related opportunities into their academic instruction. Students at DeBakey participate in preceptorships. Students in Johnson County are responsible for maintenance and upkeep of the greenhouse and the aquaculture center. The LAMP students actually attend classes every day at the GM facility, working hand in hand or shoulder to shoulder with auto workers and managers in the plant. And the work-based learning is a key factor at the East San Gabriel ROP. The final piece of the definition that's important for us is the whole notion of over an extended period of time. When curricula is truly integrated, strategies that connect academic and vocational content are reinforced again and again through this continued activity over that extended period of time. Curriculum integration involves a series of related and progressively more complex activities that require students to use and build on academic and vocational knowledge. Again, here, DeBakey is a perfect example. They provide progressively more in-depth and complex study of the healthcare industry over the 4-year period. Early on, they're learning about different kinds of health things. They have a cat lab where they actually do dissecting, and then it works finally up to their preceptorships, where they are in hospitals, learning from the doctors in the different facilities. It's wonderful that it's on the Texas Medical Center, because the Texas Medical Center has so many different possibilities and offerings for the students. One example, it was very interesting in talking to one student who was in an orthopedic preceptorship. And she said, you know, I finally realized why geometry is important, because the doctor was talking about the importance of the triangle in looking at the person's limb that had broken. So it was just like, for the first time in the student's career, the real world came into geometry for her. And she realized why that was important for her to be working on it. But this had built from 9th grade through high school. In LAMP, the capstone experience is another example where they draw on their lessons in math, science, English, and social studies, as well as all of their knowledge on the manufacturing processes to present solutions to real problems at the GM facility. Based on the examples from the 4 sites, we think that the revised definition, and I'll throw up now the second part of it, really fills a gap in the field and provides another lens for examining curriculum integration. And again, we hope to use this as we go out into the sites in the winter and spring of next year to see if the definition holds more. The second question that I'd like to address focuses on what instructional strategies are associated with curriculum integration. And we've identified three that we think are very important. The first one is teaming. We saw a lot of teaming in the different sites, and we see teaming around two different aspects. The first part is teaming around the development of curriculum content, where teachers get together, work together in developing the curriculum. We saw that in LAMP, where the faculty and the teachers from the Ingham ISD worked with the content experts from the auto plant in putting together the curriculum. The second piece of the teaming is in the instructional delivery, where in LAMP, Johnson County, and DeBakey, the teachers are working together to deliver the curriculum. And that just seems to be a very powerful strategy for integrating curriculum. The second strategy for curriculum integration revolves around the different kinds of learning that we saw, both project-based learning, theme-based learning, work-based learning. Those three kinds of strategies seem to be good strategies for integrating curriculum. Project-based learning we saw a lot of in LAMP, and their capstone experience was really based on a project and a focus that those students were taking. Theme-based learning at DeBakey is from 9th grade through the 12th grade. Medical, healthcare, and the health professions is the theme that runs throughout that school. You can't talk to a student or a faculty member that doesn't talk about the theme in everything, in almost everything that they do. They're even writing about it in their phys ed classes and relate it back to health. And then finally, in all four again, the work-based learning, it was an important aspect, and in all of the work-based learning that we saw, they were really trying to integrate academic and vocational curriculum, including the school-run businesses in Johnson County. And then the final strategy, and this is one that we're seeing some of, and we think more work needs to be on, and it's really where a teacher needs to develop an integrated curriculum on their own, where they're not benefiting from team teaching or working with other teachers. And in Johnson County, early on, they began by what I'll call informal teaming and building academic into the curriculum, where the teacher said, we really need to do this. They didn't have formal teaming taking place where teachers were team teaching or even developing curriculum together, but they got together and they said, I really need to think about how can we put English or science or social studies into what we're doing in the agricultural area. So it was less formal kind of teaming that took place, and we think that that's something that we're going to need to look at. So, Robin, I'll turn back to you. And
the next question I was going to try to address was, how does integrated curriculum differ from what normally occurs in the delivery of academic and vocational instruction? So Ivan indicated early in his remarks, one of the problems we had with definition when we began to think about developing protocols for this study was, how are we going to differentiate when we go out between what we mean by curriculum integration and what almost always occurs in vocational instruction as a matter of course. It's almost impossible to teach a vocational class and not infuse some academic content. If you're teaching carpentry, you're going to have measurement. If you're teaching business courses, you're going to have some math. If you're teaching culinary arts, you're going to have some math, and perhaps some social studies in the form of relating food and food choices and traditions to the cultures in which they are rooted. So we had to begin to get beyond, well, yes, we know that happens, but we're talking about something different. And to some extent, we realized that that happens, I'd say, in my own personal opinion, to a lesser extent in academic classes. Folks will tell you why you're going to need this as you go to college to prepare for your career in. So as we explored this, we ultimately in the definition Ivan just pointed out, realized there was a lot that had to do with the embedding in one another versus the isolation. This whole concept of each building on the other, and that I don't care how well I teach math, and if I reference how math is used in the automotive industry, or I reference how math is used in the medical field, if I don't have a firmer base than that, it's sprinkling here, sprinkling there, I'm really not integrating it. And if it's not being reinforced on the other side, we're suggesting that it's really not integration, and that's a key distinction. The other distinctions we would make are in terms of frequency, depth, and intensity. Frequency, because once or twice is nice. Those are the lesson plans that we've seen in lots of places. We saw when we did our review, folks had 1 or 2 lesson plans that they did annually or for career month or something of that ilk, and they were pretty good, but it was a one-shot deal and not heard from again until we got to the career fair day the following year. And so we considered the frequency important and the intensity and depth. And there again, I would also go back to what Ivan was saying about DeBakey. We did find that, in terms of particularly the intensity and the depth, to be an amazing model, because it had example after example after example in every course, whether it was a career and technical education course or an academic course. And by the way, that school identifies 100% of its students as career and technical education students. So they are obviously getting some Perkins money. The other question that I wanted to tackle, and then we're going to open it up for the field here, what can schools and districts do to help academic and vocational teachers collaborate to deliver integrated curriculum in a vocational course and in an academic course? I would start, before I get to specific strategies, I'd start with my observation from the time I spent in the field, that there is still, I would say, evidence of greater receptivity to integration of academic material into vocational classes. We know that's been there for a long time, and it does seem the resistance in some quarters is getting higher, in part because of the standards movement. That I've got so many things I have to do, and I just don't have time to deal with that. But beyond that, the strategies and supports for integration I don't think are that much different. I just think it's harder to move sometimes some of the more traditional academic teachers, but not all the voc teachers are willing to go along either. I will say that. We've certainly seen examples of resistance in that camp as well. One of the strategies, or one of the most important things a district or a school can do, we believe, is give philosophical recognition to the notion that curriculum integration is important. If you're a teacher or an employer or a university and you want to try to get something going, if the leadership doesn't buy it, doesn't think it's important, doesn't see a need for it, it is much harder to get going. It is much harder to get folks to join your team, to come along for this ride. Not to mention, there again, there are resource issues. And the leadership in the schools and in the districts needs more than just saying, yeah, it's important. They have to understand and articulate a vision that isn't based on academics and career and technical education as an either or more frequently an academics for some kids and vocational for these kids, that they need to clearly communicate that academic and vocational can be much more powerful together than either can be alone. In terms of specific strategies, professional development, time, and particularly common planning time are, I think, essential. You don't just start this one day and implement it because you think it's a good idea. It takes time to work together, to get to know each other, to understand what you're going to do, how you're going to do it. And this is where the leadership of the school or district come in. You've got to be willing to make that happen, either in professional development days, in workshops, in your scheduling. It's common. We all know common planning time is hard to schedule, and it's going to take some commitment from the leadership. And I also want to underscore right now something else, that if a teacher or a community member, a faculty member wants to get into curriculum integration, it is incredibly important, we think, and this is where we're going to be testing again as we go back out in the field, to understand the constraints and circumstances under which he or she is operating, under which, the context in which he or she is operating, as we have put it. And that it's going to be very different if you happen to be in a community that has a propensity toward the academy model, that accepts and supports it, or has already established career pathways and is moving toward team teaching in those pathways, versus if you're in a large regional voc tech center, as something along the lines of the structures of the ROP, where multiple vocational tracks are clustered away from the academic instruction. And how you design a program and how you support it and facilitate it is going to be very different based on the structures and the context. And other than that, I would also say I would encourage folks to look at the activities we developed for follow-up that are on the web page along with the questions. And I guess we are now ready for questions. Okay?
Before we do that, let me
That's right.
do a brief summary of the messages, and then please open it up to questions. The first is that the driver alone does not matter. This does not seem to be, from what we have found, the critical element. Second, the driver may not be able to shape or create the context. And it really should be the driver may be able to shape or create the context, because sometimes they can. And that's an important thing to remember. They can't. It depends on how malleable, as Robin said, the context actually is. Third is that circumstances and structures, as Robin has just been saying, are key to guiding curriculum integration strategies and approaches. And we've tried to identify 3. There may be more. We'll be continuing to look at that. Fourth, the definition of curriculum integration needs to be more clearly defined. We've taken a first step at putting together a definition. We're beginning to share that with others who are taking shots at it like we took shots at everybody else's. So hopefully this will lead to a definition that more people feel comfortable with, that is more specific. And then finally, there seems to be a lot of curriculum integration, as we've defined it, out there going on, but it's hard to find. You've really got to search hard to find what we'll call the good curriculum integration. So with that, we'll open it up to any questions, both from the audience here and from the webcast.
Rockhold, who would like to know if you can cite some research that indicates that students in integrated settings perform better than those students in traditional educational settings.
The LAMP longitudinal is going to, as I mentioned earlier, through the LAMP project, and Ivan has been more directly involved in that than I, so I will hand it over to him in a minute. We have a control group. We are looking at tracking outcomes over an extended period of time. We are now into, the second year of tracking the first class, I believe. And so the findings are at best preliminary. We have some evidence that they are going to college or to some type of post-secondary education or training at a slightly higher rate than their peers who didn't participate. They seem to be earning more than their peers who didn't participate. They are more apt to be in both the workplace and post-secondary education. And then the wild card in that is they don't seem to be as happy about their jobs right now as their peers.
Some of them, and that's changing. We're on the third wave of some data collection, and as Robin said, we've got a comparison group. So the two groups look very similar. I think the important thing with the question is there's not a lot of research out there that has done work on the impact, if you will, of curriculum integration with either control groups or comparison groups. This LAMP study is one of the few that we know about. Robin's right. The LAMP students seem to be doing better. Their grades are slightly higher in college. They're slightly more likely to go to college. They're working at about the same rate while they're going to college. A lot of these are full-time workers, full-time students, but that's fairly typical now out there in a lot of places. A number of them are working for General Motors. and one of the senses is that, oh, they're being prepared to work in their industry in these dead-end jobs. Well, I think what's really happening there, and we're going back to try to get more depth on the data, is that these are just better jobs than the other jobs that are available. They pay much more. They're paying, $15 to $18 an hour compared to the $8 to $10 that you can find in other places. Doesn't mean that these individuals are going to be in those jobs for the rest of their lives, but that's what will continue. I think more important, though, for that particular question is there is not a lot of research out there that has been able to isolate curriculum integration against all of those other things that students do and take in while they're in school.
And this is a broader issue in the ed reform field. We have been hit with this almost any time we've done any evaluation work on our ed reform strategy. We frequently got this during our work on the School to Work Learning Center through the efforts we had in the field. People would come up, okay, how do I isolate the impact of my School to Work effort? Well, it's just very difficult. You've got hundreds of reform strategies going on in a district or school building. Kids are engaged in many of them. It's almost impossible. The analogy I've frequently used in the field is you've got an 80-year-old person, and you stand them up in front of this room. Well, why did he make it to 80? You've got diet, you've got genetics, you've got use of alcohol and tobacco. You've got, in some cases, ethnicity in some health factors. You've got all these things, and you can say, well, somehow they all came together and he's made it to 80. But you don't say, okay, 20.5 years diet, 2.4 years genetics, 4.5 years access to health care. You don't know.
I have a colleague who says, take credit for everything. So if the students are doing better and there's integrated curriculum, take credit for it. You can't prove it very well, but do take credit for it.
One of our past speakers on this in the series was on contextualized learning. And when I hear you talk about integration, it sounds like many of the same things that she talked about in contextualized learning. When is it integration? When is it contextualized learning?
I turn to Robin. And the reason I'm turning to Robin is Robin has been working with NPR on the meta-evaluation of the the contextual teaching and learning studies. I'll put my 2 cents in and then she can give you the real facts behind it. I'm not sure there's a lot of difference. I mean, for me, it's curriculum integration when it's meeting that definition of depth and continuous, long-term. I think the newer definitions and the way people are looking at contextual teaching and learning talks about some of the same things. So we in the field haven't done a very good job, but as I said, Robin's been much closer to this than I have.
I'm very close to it, and I can't say that I can draw a clear-cut distinction. You could, going back to earlier definitions, before, indeed, Ohio State got involved in helping to focus and expand and make a much more detailed definition of contextual teaching and learning available to the field, you could cite examples of contextual teaching that didn't integrate things. You could have, for example, some work in the mathematics arena where you weren't engaging a vocational teacher. You were taking kids out and they were going to build a model to scale, but you didn't talk about carpentry. You didn't talk about engineering. You didn't talk about architecture. It's just, okay, how does the math work out here? And I think that the work Ohio State has done on contextual teaching and learning has broadened those definitions as well. I think they have taken the definitional challenge in that arena in the direction we'd like to see the definition of curriculum integration pushed and expanded. I would also say, somewhat cynically, a lot of the different distinctions, I think, are based on who's looking at it. I mean, you can get into extensive discussions with folks on whether something is contextual teaching, contextual learning, or project-based learning. And I don't think there's a right or wrong. It may have a lot The other example I use on that is if you're in the evaluation world. Whether you talk about things in terms of measures or indicators frequently depends on not only who taught you, but which textbooks were used. And I don't think there's a right or a wrong, and sometimes the terms are used interchangeably.
And let me just take it one step. I'm not sure it's further. I think that if the contextual teaching and learning people put on their lens and walked into these 4 sites, I think they'd say, oh, there's a lot of contextual teaching and learning going on there. If we took the integrated curriculum or curriculum integration lens and went into some of their sites, which hopefully we'll be able to do in the next step, we would probably say, oh, there's a lot of curriculum integration going on. And it's definitional in language, and we need to talk more about it to try to help that. I think Robin's example of what we talk about in evaluation, but also the notion of there are groups that talk about theme-based. We don't do project-based learning, we do theme-based learning. What's the difference? Others who talk about project-based learning, well, and then others who talk about problem-based learning, and then out in East San Gabriel, they're
design-based learning.
Design-based learning. What's the difference? Are there real differences, or is this semantics? And I think we need to look as a field at this and really get at what's underlying this. What is it, and how does it help students? I mean, that's what we thought was so powerful about some of these curriculum integration models. Students were getting turned on and doing real well. I mean, those students at the Bakey, one of the outcomes that we didn't talk about, there's $10 million worth of college scholarships there for those students. That's a lot. They've got, joint programs with the University of Houston, where full scholarship to the University of Houston, another joint program. If you finish that, you're in Baylor Medical College. Free ride. That's worth a lot of money. And the students are succeeding in it. So it's those kinds of things.
In your presentation, you talked about the importance of professional development and rather extensive discussion about one school. Then at the end, you talk about the importance of having joint planning time to do this, and you also mentioned the importance of the leader in saying this is important for this agency to do. What have you learned across sites about professional development if I'm an administrator or a teacher who's thinking about doing this, about really carrying it out? Do you have anything across sites?
Every one of our sites has extensive professional development, and they do it in lots of different ways. I mean, I think what Robin talked about, the common planning time, most of the sites had common planning time, essential, beyond the professional development. All of the sites used the summer to do both vertical and horizontal teaming around the different curriculum integration. The LAMP project has, because of how it's structured and because it is a pull-out and those 3 teachers work together, they're doing professional development all the time. It is ongoing. They're out both making presentations and going to presentations. At the Bakey High School, those teachers are working together. Again, I think in all 3 sites, all 4 of the sites, the leadership was essential. The leaders said, curriculum integration is important to us. If we have to change it, we will, and professional development is the vehicle for us to get there. So it's straight across the board, all 4 of those sites.
Every single site, it wasn't just we're tolerating this, we're embracing it, a priority, and we're going to redo how we do business if we have to. The ROP, I think, is perhaps the most compelling example to me because it had the most structural constraints vis-a-vis our new definition. But the superintendent has absolutely laid down the law that every teacher in that school will go through his or her curricula, look at I say curricula because many of them are teaching more than one class. Look at how each of those classes or syllabi align with the state standards, pull out what I teach here, here, and here. And those that are not, and then they're also going to be having workshops how to do more of it. First off, what's there already, and then what else do you need to do to be contributing very aggressively to what kids have to do now to get a diploma in this state?
build on this question. You pointed out again how important it is for teachers to have time to work together to talk about integration. This, of course, requires resources, and I presume that the project is providing resources for teachers to do this. What do you anticipate will happen if, when the project is over and those resources are not there, that the school district has to pick up the resources to continue this essential release time?
I'll speak about a couple, and I think Robin will probably speak about a couple of others. The DeBakey has been doing this for 20 years. They get lots of resources, but I think that the leadership has said this is important, and we're gonna revise scheduling around it. We have expectations that teachers will put in extra to do that common planning, and that those expectations were beyond resources. Their summer institutes that they hold to do the planning are part of what is expected of every teacher, and every teacher is part of that. In the LAMP program, which started with a large infusion of money from the UAW General Motors Center for Human Resources, that infusion has each year been reduced. Yet the professional development that goes on among those three teachers and the coordinator is ongoing. They're always looking for opportunities. They're getting professional development resources from their home districts. They still get a little bit from the CHR, but a lot of it is done on their own because it's so important for them. They're into TQM kinds of activities and other kinds of professional development that they turn right around and build into the curriculum. You know, when you're working at an auto plant that works around TQM and revised manufacturing and organizational structures, you have to be there and developing and learning about those as you're going on, and they turn around and bring those right back into the curriculum.
I picked up on Johnson County, Tennessee, because that is really an area that is, if anything, not resource-rich. They did have a significant infusion of grant funding and private funding to support the capital expenses, the building, the greenhouse, and the aquaculture center. But basically they're using their professional development days, and almost all school districts still have them. You can talk to a lot of teachers who will tell you for the most part they're a waste of time. I get herded into the cafeteria and have to listen to somebody that I have no interest in hearing, but nonetheless they have them. And what they're saying is we're using our existing resources, we're allocating that time for these teachers to get together and work out a plan. That same thing is happening, as I said, in the ROP. They've been at it for 20 years. They started in the early 80s. They have made it an absolute priority to find the funding to keep it going. In some cases, it's summer workshops. In some cases, it's the common planning time during the year. But there again, that's within one institution. Getting common planning time across institutions is something we didn't see anybody doing well.
I know the picture that we painted is a very rosy picture. At the DeBakey, with its 60 faculty members, almost all of them participate in integrated curriculum. Not all of them, but almost all of them. And I think they participate in the professional development because they have come to realize how important that planning and integrated curriculum that they need to work on together is for their success in working with their students. LAMP, it's easy. Those four people are together all day, every day, so that's easier. But in a DeBakey, I think it's that the faculty have come to realize this is a much more powerful way of teaching, and they're willing to invest and use their professional development days in that way. And the leadership has said, that's what we're going to do. One time it's going to be horizontal integration, and the next time it's going to be vertical. And they keep mixing it up, which is really exciting. One time they said, okay, let's figure out a project for the whole school. And they did a Millennium Project. And the different classes took different centuries. And they used that as a vehicle to talk about health. Again, remember, this is a health magnet kind of school, but health and using and relating it to geography, economics, what was written then, how did people live then, the whole thing, and they did that around different centuries. It was fascinating, and again, most of the faculty participated in it, so that English teacher had to figure out how to use it, and the math teachers had to figure out how to use it, and the language teachers had to figure figure out how to use it, as well as the science teachers. I mean, some of the science teachers had to go back and figure out, oh, I hadn't even heard about that disease before. You know, it hasn't been in our discussions, and they did their research on it to make it relate more to the students and what they were doing around there. So.
And I was absolutely about the leadership, because yes, time is money. You know, if they do not have the professional development days, or don't have the commitment to this effort to allow the staff to use their professional development days to further the curriculum integration effort, you're going to have a problem. And it does take some administrative support to get common planning time. Everybody's got a planning period, but getting the right people together at the same time sometimes requires administrative support, if not an act of God.
Let me just take it back to where we started this research. We were looking at the drivers. The drivers are still important because they're the leaders, but it's not always the same driver. At DeBakey, where Michael DeBakey was the original driver at the university, the principal of the school has become a very powerful and important player. And she takes the lead in the professional development with great support from the university. So a driver still is important, but as we say in the second message, they need to be able to shape and recreate the context, and they seem to be doing that in most of these sites.
I have a question from one of the scholars that what did you see as far as bringing in novice teachers into these schools, and were they doing anything different with them to bring them on board with the curriculum integration process? So what were they doing?
Okay, let me give you two examples. LAMP, where everybody was a novice the first year, and they were doing what they referred to as just-in-time instruction. Here,
LAMP, they weren't all first-year teachers.
Right, yeah, but novice in terms of LAMP, and doing just-in-time instruction because the curriculum had just been developed, 3 weeks before, and they were still working on it, so they were, a day ahead of the students. They did a lot of joint planning and professional development. DeBakey takes all of its new teachers, novice, brand new teachers, and does an extensive orientation with them around the health science curriculum and around curriculum integration, and every one of those teachers has a mentor for the whole year from the faculty. Not always in the same curricular area. So an English teacher doesn't necessarily have an English teacher as their mentor, but has somebody who is mentoring them the whole time around integrated curriculum and what it means to be a teacher at DeBakey High School for the health sciences.
Just new teachers, or is that any new teacher coming into their system?
Both. Both are treated the same way. It's very interesting. They've got, on the health side, they have people banging down the door. On the science and math side, they've had struggle finding the quality teachers at DeBakey that fit in. But that's, finding quality calculus and physics teachers anywhere we're finding as we're going at is a challenge.
This question comes from Steve Muma in Minnesota, and he wondered if any of the programs that you studied mentioned having a 3-year plan, because what he's seeing is if they don't find any success after the first year, they dump it. So did they put a plan into place that went longer than a year?
Well, as we indicated, several of the sites in which we've been conducting our research have been around since the 80s. They have evolved, they've adapted, they've perhaps shifted their focus. And I don't think any of the sites, when I talked to them, were under the misconception that we're going to be able to show data that change the world at the end of 1 year, and perhaps not even after 3 years. As Ivan said, we're just beginning to get longitudinal data now out of the LAMP program. Some of the cases, they had time-limited funding in terms of a grant that could be used over X period of time. It's certainly been the case with the sequence of grants at the ROP, but I didn't hear anybody talking about it in terms of we've got 1 year or 3 years or 5 years to prove ourselves. Their focus was more on what they were trying to do and how they were going to begin to collect data that showed some impact.
I think it's a very interesting question. We didn't ask it. I mean, clearly DeBakey, it's a 4-year high school. So their plan is for 4 years. But it's something, I think that if we did ask most of the people that we talked to, they'd say it's a, you know, in the case of LAMP, it's a 1-year program, but they're thinking for the whole effort longer than 1 year. It's 1 year for the students, but it's not 1 year for the program. I think the same thing clearly for Johnson County. They've been at that a long time. Again, it's a 1-year course, but they're thinking the whole program is much longer.
Well, actually, it's now a series of courses. They've got 8 or 9 courses now that are under
for mostly juniors,
the agriculture umbrella,
yeah.
And folks standing in line to get into them.
But whoever raised it, that will now be a question that we'll ask in terms of their thinking and their planning. Is it a 1 year or is it a longer term, and how have they thought about that?
And this is going to sound like a broken record, but I do think that this again gets into the support that the folks had implementing these efforts, that they didn't have just a 1 year window to show results.
So it was a long commitment. I mean, it was a long-term commitment.
I think in people's mind it was that they were going to change the way they were going to do things, and it was going to last. Okay. It wasn't like we were just coming in and going to do it quickly, and then if it, you know, that's it after a year. When
you looked at the mentoring programs, did you look in-depthly at them? Because there's a conversation among the scholars going on that typical mentor programs are, you know, what form do I fill out? Where's the Xerox machine? Those kinds of things, and it doesn't get into the nuts and bolts of teaching and learning.
We didn't spend as much time on the mentoring program maybe as we should have, but again, we were focusing on integrated curriculum and not a little bit about the teaching.
But I think that's a key.
I think it is a key, and at least according to the principal, who we heard the most about the mentoring program, it is the mentors are going into the classrooms of the people that they're mentoring, watching what's going on, providing help. All of them, I won't say all of them, but a lot of them are doing that, working on here's strategies for integrating curriculum, because a lot of these teachers come in with no health background, if they're coming in the academic areas, and also strategies to the best way to work with different teachers who are on the health side if you're the academic. So I think it's more than this is where the Xerox machine is, this is where the faculty lounge is, thank you very much, don't bother me anymore. But again, in DeBakey, because of the interest in the academy and the academy succeeding, and maybe in part it's because it has Michael DeBakey's name on it and he won't let it fail, and in part because it's at the Texas Medical Center, which is the 5th largest city in Texas, you know, that they won't let it fail. They'll keep working at it and we'll make sure it succeeds. It's that important. They're now talking about expanding it, maybe going to a middle school so it becomes a theater. Again, but the importance is in the whole notion of the integrated curriculum.
I would also
the sites is they value professional development and they value that mentoring more than just where things.
I would also add that mentoring has taken on a whole new dimension in some of these sites. In Johnson County, Tennessee, what you really had, and this is unusual out there, was a group of vocational teachers mentoring academic teachers in the whole notion of curriculum integration. We interviewed one academic teacher who said that prior to getting involved in this effort, this person had described the vocational programs as vacation land because the programs were deemed to be so easy. Getting in there, getting immersed in the curriculum integration with the voc teachers, the ag teachers specifically, and then team teaching with them, they had a new respect and a new dimension to their instructional portfolio.
We have another language thing, though, I think, or definitional. Not all of these places are doing mentoring like DeBakey's doing mentoring.
Yeah.
They are all doing what I'd call fairly sophisticated professional development, ongoing, continuous, teachers working together. Yeah, there's a lot of formal mentoring going on at DeBakey, a lot of informal mentoring going on in the other places, but a whole lot of professional development to really try to bring the pieces together.
Did you find a language barrier between academic teachers and career and technical education teachers?
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
And that's part of the professional development. You know, it was interesting to talk to the person at DeBakey who runs the preceptorship. You know, a term We don't use it in the academic side of the house. I'm not even sure they use it a whole lot on the medical side of the house. But one of the things that she's doing in her class is bringing in all of the academic language and linking it to the health language. So that becomes very important. Clearly in LAMP, it's a whole new language because it's a language of the manufacturing industry. Capstone experience, that's not something we talk about in the academic world. The whole human resources and statistical manipulation kinds of things. So they have to share language and definitions on an ongoing basis.
Some of it's inevitable. I mean, if you've been an English teacher all your life, how often have you really found yourself confronted with needing to talk about the terminology that one uses in aquaculture? It just hasn't come up in your day-to-day existence. I mean, unlike the ag teacher who has at least had to use the English language for a number of reasons. And some of it is just talking past each other. That, I think, is one of the experiences that people have learned to talk with each other and to each other rather than past each other and hide behind semantics.
What link have you found with high-stakes testing? And our scholar in North Carolina, Jimmy Smith, says that he's found that most teachers are afraid of doing integration or dealing with it because they're so focused on the end-of-course test or the end-of-year test.
A lot of places. It was, as I said at the end of my description, coming out and coming to the fore at the ROP, that there is a recognition within the ROP community, and I would say within the broader vocational community in the state of California, that there is a need to show that they are contributing to, not just not distracting from, achievement of academic standards. And they're in the first part of a process of trying to show and how to, first off, identifying what they may be contributing, trying to document it, and then trying to communicate it back to the academic teachers since they're spread across multiple districts. We heard similar things in Tennessee. One of the examples that comes out in a lot of places is, as an academic teacher, I am forced to integrate a lot of well-meaning things into my curriculum. DARE was one that came up frequently. It's not a bad, I'm not against it, but how do I do that? And what you're and not sacrifice the academic content. What we're now hearing out of the teachers in Tennessee is, this is actually helping enrich the academic content. It's getting kids engaged. I'm seeing how it's rigorous, and I'm seeing how it can be used to take my kids to the next level. As I said, we got kids now, self-reported data, but they're saying they are taking these classes because they help with higher levels of math and higher levels of science.
Last word, because I know that we have to end. Related to that, I think in at least 3 of the 4 sites, we have indications that the integrated curriculum is having the students who are in the integrated curriculum are doing as well, if not better, on the high-stakes tests. Clearly, the students in DeBakey, they're the top students in the district. Is it, because they came in as the top students? Probably, but they're doing better than other top students in other magnets. The students in LAMP are doing as well, if not better, than the non-LAMP students. And I think the example that Robin gave in Johnson County is the same. They're using the integrated curriculum to help with the math and science and other high-stake tests.
Ivan and Robin, thank you so much for leading us in this thought-provoking discussion. We've had a wonderful fireside chat this afternoon. And to the audience members, thank you for joining us, and thank you for joining us via the webcast. Please join us for our next scheduled Professional Development Speaker Series presentation, which is on Monday, November 19th at 3 p.m. Our speaker is Jeffrey Finkel. The topic is the Economic Development Workforce Development Connection. Again, we will have a live audience and a webcast, and all presentations will be archived on the www.nccte.org website. Okay.